Now, uh, we've been talking about making room for God. You can't make God do anything, but you can make room for God to do anything. And so how do you do that? The truth is that God has ordered the events of our life. We don't always acknowledge that we are here by the grace of God. I'm going to interview the manager of the thrift store, and she's actually supposed to be dead now, and you'll see she's very much not dead. She has a resurrection every morning about 6. She gets back to life and comes around, but I want you to listen to her story. Now, her story is that God intervened and stopped the inevitable dying process, which was greatly accelerated. But that is a dramatic intervention. What we don't always recognize is that God's intervention in our life is just as dramatic because we're here. And in Deuteronomy it says, we say, I'm alive and well, these are the works of my hand. Deuteronomy says, who gave you the strength? In other words, we are here every day by the grace of God. We get up in the morning because of the grace of God. So yeah, we may not have had the dying process reversed and given a new lease on life, but every morning God says, this is the day that I have given to you. Now go out, rejoice, be glad, and serve me. And so let's look at this intervention, but then let's apply it to our life and our service to God. All of us have to figure out why we're here. Sometimes you hear people say, I must still have something to do because I'm still alive. Now, some people, for them, the question of still being alive has a poignancy to it that the rest of us don't have to deal with. I'm talking to Danielle, the manager from the thrift store, and she had an encounter with God which puts you face to face with that question, I'm still here. Danielle, you're not supposed to be here. If I understand it, you were told that your kidney disease would have killed you before now.
Yes.
What was the story on the fact that you were supposed to be dead now? You're not, are you?
No.
Okay, good.
About 3 years ago, actually, exactly. I developed a kidney stone, which I'd never had before. Went to the emergency room. They did a bunch of tests, and they did more tests, and finally they took me aside, sent me to a specialist. The specialist said, "You've got a incredibly rare form of genetic kidney disease. We can't believe you're alive now, but you have about 3 years. That would be your maximum life expectancy," which, as you can imagine, completely devastated. For about 6 months, just totally lost. Why is this happening to me, Lord? I want to see my nephew grow up. I want to see things. There's things I haven't done yet. I feel like I'm not finished. And then, about 6 months after that all started.
You want to see Justin grow up?
No. Austin. Justin still has some work to do. No. Then about 6 months after the initial shock and despair, it started to kind of seem like a really good thing, a blessing. And I don't want to say nah, but I was going to get to go home first. Everything would be done. I wouldn't be suffering. With this disease came an incredibly restrictive diet, no protein. You can't even have peanut butter. It was 2.5 gallons of water a day, and this was just to stay alive, which wasn't really living. So it seemed like a good idea to me to go ahead and get to heaven ASAP, and I wasn't questioning where I was going. It became something to look forward to, and I had all my affairs in order. The house is in order. Had a very limited lease so that I wouldn't leave anything for my family to have to take care of. And then
You actually said that you were debt-free. You actually timed it so that
everything was worked out.
Your affairs were in order.
Our affairs were in order.
So that you could die on time.
Yeah.
Weren't you organized?
I was very organized. Well, I didn't want to leave, family with burden. That was the main focus. And then I was excited. I was excited to meet the Lord, to get on out of here in this mess that we call Earth. And then when Pastor David approached me about the thrift store, it wasn't on my list of career moves. It definitely was not on my list of things to do. I've had some lucrative careers in the past, but I figured at that point I had 6 months maybe left, and I was going to do whatever the Lord put in front of me to do for that last amount of time. Get a little elbow in upstairs.
A little time out of purgatory for good work.
Yeah. And then I started the thrift store in November, and I believe it was January. It must have been January when I went back to the specialist, and he said, let's do some blood work because you should be sicker than you are. You should be dead at this point, so if you're not dead, you should be sicker. He did the blood work, and then he ran it again, just like in the ER 3 years ago, and ran it again, and called us back in, my mother, my father, myself, and he looked us straight in the eye and said, you have kidneys of somebody half your age in 100% health condition. He said it doesn't make sense, it shouldn't exist, this was a genetic disease, it wasn't going to go away, we couldn't treat it, we were just trying to make you, I felt, as uncomfortable as possible for the last 3 years by not letting me eat protein. But no, and there's absolutely no reason in his mind that I should be healed, that I should be perfectly healthy 24-year-old. Yeah, laying now. Now I've done it.
So you're in a position where your affairs are in order, lease is going to end with your life, you're debt-free, you have positioned yourself where you can die and not inconvenience anybody. All of a sudden they say, you're not going to die. I'd like to backtrack a little bit because I'm very uncomfortable with people saying I had a pain in my stomach, I thought it was cancer, God healed me. In this case, the doctor said we didn't make a mistake because here's the first x-rays, first blood work, here's the second blood work. This is a confirmed diagnosis, it's not in error. This is a healthy functioning kidney, it is not in error. Something happened between here and here, is that correct? So this is a something that God did which man can validate. Yes.
But the doctor won't validate that.
No, he won't validate it. It's God. Spontaneous remission goes up tremendously with prayer.
Yes.
And that and coincidence.
Yes.
Now, you actually had kind of planned on dying and going to be with God. And you were eventually became comfortable with that.
Very.
And now the doctor says, afraid not, you have young kidneys, you're going to stick around a while.
Yes.
That would be good news.
One would think it would be good news. My initial reaction was not gratefulness. I certainly wasn't thankful for it because I had it in my head that I was going to heaven first and you guys had to stay here. And I was excited. When you know where you're going, it's not a scary thing. It really isn't. And I was excited. And so I almost want to say that learning that I wasn't going to die was more difficult emotionally than learning that I was going to die. But it allowed me to take some time because there's something else he wants me to do. There's something else I need to be doing. He's not finished yet. Whatever it was that he wants me to do, I want to be here to do it. And I want to be 100% in his service to do it.
Now, all of us are here by the grace of God. All of us don't get the dramatic stamp of God saying, you're my child, I'm stopping the death process, I'm saving your life, and I'm sending you on a mission. You're my child, and I want you to do something for me. Most of us just say, we're alive, there must be something for me to do. But in your case, he chose you to live longer. How do you process that confrontation between God? Once God, you're going to take me to see you face to face soon. I'm good with that. Now you tell me I have to stay on earth for something. Where did you come out of that discussion?
It's still a struggle, and it will be. I shouldn't say struggle. It's still a journey, and it's going to be a journey. Just because he rewrote the blood work, just because he rewrote my health, doesn't mean he put it in writing what I need to do next. It's not always that easy. His voice is always present, but unfortunately it's a still and small voice. It's a little hard to hear with the chaos of the world and all these big events that happen so quickly.
Did you say you're still processing?
I would say definitely still processing it. It's not, it wasn't something that I said, all right, cool, awesome, I get to live, now let's go, tour the country.
Yes. Awesome, I get to live. Now what do you want me to do? Okay. Now my feelings are hurt. I would have thought working with David, life doesn't get any better. Thank you, God.
To some degree. And I firmly believe that the end of my timeline was a let go, let God situation. I didn't have anything else to lose. And like I said, thrift store was not on my list of things to do, but when the Lord asks you to do something, even if it's through his voice on earth, you do it, especially if you've only got 6 months to live.
Yes.
I did it, and I believe that in doing his work, in following the path that he put in front of me, that I may have opened more doors for myself, that he opened more doors for me, and now I just need to see where he wants me to go.
Yeah. God does not interrupt everyone's life. Put his stamp on him and say, you're my child, I'm healing you, I want you to walk out the rest of your life fulfilling my purposes. But each of us is a child of God. Each of us has a plan, that God has a plan for our life. And each of us, the same as Danielle, has to figure it out as we walk with God. That is our message this morning, which is, what would be our life mission? Danielle's still working with hers. Hers is a little more dramatic, but all of ours is equally important. Yeah. If you're alive, God's working in your life. If you're not alive, we won't know till after the service. So, what are you going to do? How do you figure it out? It is part of the life journey to walk with God and to let him guide and direct your life. Now, God, that was an interruption encounter. And if you look at the life of Jesus Christ, much of his life was interruptions and encounters. Either people were interrupting him, Son of David, heal me. Or he would be walking and the widow of Nain was burying her son. They were coming out of the village with a funeral pyre. And he said, no, Satan, not this one. He brings the kid back to life, hands him back to her mother. His life was a series of interruptions and opportunities. Now, if we are to be Christ followers and live the life of Christ, these interruptions from people are not showstoppers, they're opportunities to serve God. Our life is about people. You watch Jesus' life, it was encounter after person after person after person. And our life mission is the same as Jesus Christ. What was his life mission? He said, I came to seek and to save those who are lost. Then he said he's sending us to do what he started. Ours is to interrupt people who don't know God, and we can't save anybody, but we can introduce them to Jesus Christ, who can change the direction of their life. Our life mission is to continue the life mission of Jesus Christ. Now, what is the position? What happens when we recognize the truth of what Paul said? He was at the Acropolis, he was teaching. He says, you guys got so many gods here, you even made one to the unknown God in case you missed one. And then he says, I represent the God who started from one man, one woman, put everybody in time and in space where they are at this moment. He is saying that you are here by the selection of God. God has watched over you and put you where you need to be when you need to be there. You are here this morning by divine appointment at the hand of God. So, what does that mean for our life if he's guiding it that closely? Each of us has to listen and walk with God to discover that journey together. It's an individual journey. Danielle is still working it out, and she feels she was rudely interrupted. She actually was quite angry that she's going to live. Why? She thought she was going to leave us behind as a bunch of suckers who still had to struggle with life and work and have diseases and go through the pain of dying. She was just going to die, go home, and leave us all behind and go to be with God. And then when she found out she has to struggle for the rest of her life with us, I would have thought that would have been a thrill. But oh no, she wanted to go first and be in the presence of God. It was an interruption of her life. Your life has been placed here. You may not have felt the interruptions. You may not have felt the interventions. But you are here by the intervention of God, just as dramatically as Danielle was. Now, when we make room for God to work in our life, when we make room for God to carry out his mission in our life, what does that look like? If you take your insert out, the first thing that stands out in people who make room for God is we need to expect divine appointments. Divine appointments are those intersections between people that was appointed by God. Many of you have had divine appointments. I had a divine appointment. I was sick. I was a doorman at a bar, and I also had my own business, and I was working all day and partying all night. And my body quit. It just wouldn't go anymore. And I had to lay in bed. They had to carry me back and forth to the bathroom. And while I'm laying in bed, I'm looking out the screen door. My parents took me to their cottage, and I'm laying in bed. And I looked through the screen door, and there was this gorgeous brunette who I'd grown up with. I don't remember her being that pretty when we were younger. But for some reason, this day, as I looked there, I was delusional. And she had been out working in Parks and Rec, and she was tanned and gorgeous. And it changed my life. 43 years later, I'm still with that vision of beauty, still in love. And it was an encounter. I found out later, she told me like 5 years after we were married. I was dating some other people at the time, and she said, I went down there to rescue from them. And rescue me she did. It was a divine appointment. If you're married, you probably had some kind of a divine appointment somewhere along the line, or you've had intersections of your life. One of them, my intersections that really, I didn't believe in God, but the Word of God didn't make any sense until someone read to me from the J.B. Phillips. When all kinds of trials and temptations crowd into your lives, my brothers, don't resent them as intruders, but welcome them as friends. Realize they've come to produce in you the quality of endurance. And let that process go on, and you will find that you become mature men and women with no weak spots. And I'm listening to this new experience of God, this new translation, this new way of speaking about God. And it changed my life. Maybe this stuff could make sense. So you've had divine encounters from time to time. I've had divine encounters from time to time. God is always intersecting our life, and we have to expect divine appointments. But we need to expect them and recognize them. If we expect them, it's easier to see them. If we think we're just bumbling through life, bumping into this, bumping into that, and none of it makes any sense, we will overlook, miss, and not see things that God has laid out in front of us. We've been looking at the Shunammite woman who saw in this Elisha, the man of God, something extraordinary, recognized it as an opportunity for a divine interruption, for a divine appointment, and she said, look, come to my house. We want you to, every time you come through, to come into my place. She recognized something here that God was going to do something. They built him a room. Every time he came through, he stayed up there. That divine intersection, that divine appointment changed the rest of her life. And the story goes that she was a wealthy woman, really had nothing to needed nothing. Elisha talks to her and he says, what can I do for you? You've been so gracious to me. Her answer was, you can't do anything for me. I'm filthy rich. I don't even use Sprint. And so, she had servants, she had a husband, he had farms, he had wealth, and literally she wanted nothing. I don't need anything. And the servant who was with Elisha said, did you notice she doesn't have any kids? That might be a place to start. Elisha says, oh yeah, okay, everybody needs a kid. So he speaks the word, and she has a baby boy. Now, the baby boy grew up, was out in the field with his dad, watching him one day, and he got a headache. Dad sent the boy back home with her mom. The boy died. She takes her son, puts him in the room she'd built for Elisha the prophet, lays him on the bed that was Elisha's bed, and then she goes and hauls off to Elisha the prophet. And she says, buddy, I didn't ask for this kid because I knew when I had a kid he'd break my heart. But oh no, you had to give me this baby, and what I feared most has happened. He died. Now I'm going through incredible pain. This is your doing. You fix it. All right? So Elisha's kind of in a bad spot here. He's like, okay, I can solve this. And he says to Gehazi, he says, take my staff, go lay it on the boy, say a prayer, he'll come back to life. Elisha hands his staff to Gehazi. Gehazi takes off, goes into the room where the baby boy is, lays it on it, and the little rascal stayed dead. Oh, that didn't work. Goes back to Elisha. Elisha says, well, what's the good news? Did the kid come back to life? No. Okay. Plan B. I'll go myself. Off he goes. Lays the staff. Nothing. Lays on the kid. Nothing. Then he does what all pastors do when they get in trouble. He paced and talked to himself. Mumble, 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 mumble. What do I do? Lays back down on the kid, and he's still praying and mumbling, talking to God. And the kid starts to sneeze and comes back to life, takes the kid, gives him back to his mother. This lady got a child, got the child returned back to life, all because she made room for God in her life. When you invite God into your life to do his mission with your life, when you give him access to the direction of your life, it will always be a dramatic, exciting journey. And this lady was finding out firsthand the thrill of following God. Now, when you expect divine appointments, you see that this is something special, you invite God into your life, what's the next thing that happens? We have to learn to respond in faith. She said, let's build a place for him. That's not why she received all these blessings. Statements don't get you anything. What got her into the presence of God was she responded and she did what she said. And they built a room, and Elisha did move in. And she had the man of God in her house. James says, if you hear the word and don't do it, you have deceived yourself. Knowledge is of no value without acting on it. So as followers of God, who have the Spirit of God in us, who are actively cooperating with God for our life mission, we learn to respond to the voice of God and to the Word of God, and to do what it is that we feel led to do. And what God leads us to do almost inevitably has to do with people. If you don't like people, you're going to have trouble. Why? Because God asks us to intersect with people's lives. Or God sends people to intersect with our life. Here's the deal. You may have children that aren't following God, but he will put someone into their life to intersect their life, to talk to them somewhere along the line. That's how my brother came to Jesus Christ. A guy working for him just assumed, since he was a pastor's son, that he followed Jesus Christ. He's sitting there talking to Tim about God and all this stuff. And then they go off. Tim never told the guy this, but he says, well, I'm a dummy. I grew up in this stuff. I know this stuff. And so he finally said, yeah, you're right. Gave his life to God. He knew he should have done it years ago, but that was a divine appointment. Two of them leaning on a fence post, just talking about God. God will send somebody into the life of your kids, and he will use you to intersect the life of someone else's child or someone else. Our life is about people and the kingdom of God. And these divine appointments, number one, we have to recognize them and for what they are, and not just go banging through them, because if we're not looking for it, if we're not open to it, if we're not able to be used by God, his Spirit in us will tell you when this is a divine appointment, which means we have to be running at a speed that allows us to hear the voice of God. So we respond, we hear the voice of God, we expect God to use us, and then we do what he asks us to do. The third thing that happens to people who make room for God in their life when God comes in is they expect God's provision. They expect God's provision. You have, as a child, if you're not going into every circumstance knowing that God is ahead of you and he's going to work on it, you don't quite understand your relationship between you and God. He already knows what your prayers are going to be. He already knows what your needs are before you know they are. He is already there, already working on it. Why? You're his kid. He loves you to pieces. He thinks you're the neatest thing since sliced bread. He watches your life. He watches over you, guides it, keeps you from shipwrecking, provides for you. Here in this lady's case, she didn't even know what she needed. By the time we get from chapter 4 of 2 Kings to chapter 8 of 2 Kings, chapter 4, she had no needs. Elisha, what do you want? Don't need nothing, but thanks for asking. Chapter 8, she is in need, begging for her land to come back. Why? God had provided provision she didn't need to know. She didn't even know she was going to have. Ahead of time, Elisha said, there's a great famine coming here. You need to go down out of this country. There's going to be rain and crops there. So she picked up her family, moved down there. For 7 years, the famine was in Israel. She moves down there, and then after the famine's over, she comes back home. First of all, God's told her how to avoid the famine and how to avoid catastrophe and disaster in her life. Told her where to go so that she could still provide. Now, 7 years later, she comes back. She didn't know she was going to have that need to get out of the country. She comes back, and she doesn't own her land anymore. And so now she goes from being a wealthy landowner to poverty and begging for her land to come back. And once again, sometimes the hardships in our life, we look at it, why is this happening to me? This is all bad. Sometimes it is really God moving in your life. And so she comes back begging for her land back. She's in the king's court, and Gehazi is in there, and he's talking to the king. She doesn't know anything about this. And Gehazi, the king says, tell me, Gehazi, you're the right-hand man of Elisha. Tell me a little bit about what this guy did. Tell me his exploits. Gehazi said, yeah, where do you want me to start, man? He's doing everything. Once there was this lady, and she had a bunch of debt. They were going to throw her kids in jail till she paid it back, and she came to Elisha the prophet, and Elisha says, gather up all the pots you can from all your friends, all your neighbors, all your uncles, all your aunts, just get them all, and take that little pot of oil you have there and start pouring it in. She filled up the whole house full of pots all over the place. She takes this little pot of oil, and she filled up hundreds of gallons of pots, great big pots of oil all over the place. And then when she filled up the last pot, that little oil bucket quit pouring, and she had enough there to pay off all her debts, and her kids weren't in prison. Gehazi said, man, you should have seen that day. The whole village was partying, and they all had cheap oil. It was like living in Saudi Arabia. So here, that was a miracle. He says, well, how about another time? Axes, because they were iron, were expensive. And so this guy's borrowed a very expensive axe. It comes off the end of the handle, falls in the river, and he's in big trouble. He doesn't have money to buy this axe, so they call Elisha the prophet. He whittles the stick, throws it in the river, and this expensive axe head comes back up out of the water. You should have seen the guys on work that day, man. They were so thrilled. And there was another time that in Jericho, there's this water source, And it was poisoned. The women were not able to carry their babies to full term. People were getting sick. They'd water the land with it. It would quit producing. He took a bunch of salt, ground it up, threw it in the water. And King, that was 15 years ago. To this day, that water source in Jordan is still used by everybody. It's still fresh water because that's one of the things that prophet did. And then he said, let me tell you another thing. There was this lady, a Shunammite lady, and she made a place for the prophet to stay. And I was there, and Elisha couldn't think of anything to do. He's a man of God. He doesn't know what's going on. So I had to tell him, the lady needs a kid. She doesn't have any. So Elisha prays, she has a kid. Kid dies, Elisha brings her back to life. You wouldn't believe the things he's done. In fact, there's the lady right there. She's right there. She's in your court. This is the lady right here. Come on in here. Talk to the king. Before she even knew, she was going to have to make her case to get her land back. Gehazi was in the presence of the king, telling her story when she showed up to plead her case. As you walk with God, your eyes have to be open for the opportunities. Then you have to respond to the opportunities. When my kids freak out, I tell them over and over again, everything always works out every time. Just relax. God will move people and mountains. Everything always works out every time. It doesn't look like it's working out from here. I lost my land, my kid died, blah, 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 blah. If you're a child of God, listen to me. Listen to me. Everything always works out every time. You can be in an impossible bad situation, but God's doing something good. Let me ask you, how many of you have been in the ugliest day of your life? You thought it was all over. Yeah? I mean, anybody else? Nobody else had a bad day? Okay. Well, relax, it's coming. Out of those bad days, how many died? You hear me? Yeah, that's right, we won't know till after service. Okay. How did it turn out? How did it turn out? This very bad thing, you lost sleep, you fretted, you worried, and maybe you're in the middle of it. Take it from us who've been through the meat grinder. It's going to be fine. Would you relax? God is your provider. Your heavenly Father happens to be quite well off. He's quite wealthy. He knows what you need. This lady in this story, he knew what she needed. He was ahead of her years in advance, preparing the circumstances so that when the need finally showed up on her radar, he had already been there and already met it. In your life, you need to expect God to be there before you are. That's the way it works with the children of God. Are you in a bad circumstance? Relax. God's on it. He's ahead of you. He's ready to do it. Now, Casey's in the office, and she's had 4 or 5 things. And in order for God to answer her prayers, he had to be way ahead of her, get other people to agree to stuff they didn't know before the need came up, before she knew the need, before the people knew the need. Now, I can't tell, she can't really, some of it's personal, so I can't tell you, but there's one story that she can share with you. And you want to talk about, sometimes we think, my prayers, does God hear them? You know what I mean? Does God hear my prayers? Just listen to this as she talks about her conversations with God and what God did and said. She speaks well when she's terrified, by the way.
All right. Pastor David wanted me to tell you all about when you pray specific to God. And firstly, I didn't do anything to deserve anything that God's done for me, so all the glory and everything goes to him. But I've been through a court case for the past, a little over a year or so to get my girls back, and it's not been easy. It's been really hard. And a lot of the times to get me through all this, I completely leaned on God. I had to, sometimes I didn't even think I was going to get through it, and somehow I did. He got me through it. So when this was coming to a closing, I had a specific way I wanted it done. I wanted to go to court. I wanted to take myself to court. I wanted to be there by myself, and after it was all over, I wanted to sit in my car alone with God and just say thank you, because for me, that's how I wanted it, because we've been through it together. So my court date was on May 5th, and I wasn't by myself. I actually got a ride there. So all of these things, I had forgotten I asked God about that. I forgot that I prayed for all those specific things. And it wasn't like that, but I was okay with me because I was there to close my case out, and that was what I wanted. I get there, and I'm not on the docket, and I don't understand why. They actually tell me that I should be there the next week on Tuesday, and I knew I wasn't wrong because a day like that's burned into a mother's memory. I was like, whatever. I was really upset about it. I didn't understand why that day I didn't get my case closed, and I still had to hang on for another week till it happened. And closer to the people that took me to court that day had to go out of town. They had to leave, so I was home alone. So it looks like I'm going to have to take myself to court. And all these things started to fall in place. And when it got closer to the court, the day before, actually, I was sitting at home, and all these prayers that I'd asked God, all these memories of what I specifically asked him came just back to me about all the stuff I asked. So the day court came, I took the girls to school, and I drove to court by myself. I went in court by myself, and not only that, I was sitting in the courtroom. I was the last one called, so literally I was in there alone in front of the judge, and when it was over with, I left by myself, and I got to walk to my car, and I sat in my car all by myself, and I told God thank you. And when I sat there, I realized that every single thing about that day, down to sitting in my car, even where I parked it pretty much, was exactly what I asked for. And it made me realize that, I could have had it closed on the 5th, and that would have been fine because I'd had the girls, but it was almost like he wanted me to know that he hears everything I said. He specifically, to the way I imagined it, gave it to me. And it was the most personal and most intimate thing I've had with God since I gave my life over to him. So it's changed something. I see things different. I know that he hears everything that I say to him. So it was a big deal. So that's what happened to me.
Thank you, Casey. God to answer her prayer specifically, he had to mess with my plans. We were all going to, I saw the document. The document's for the 5th. It was right there in writing. And we were all going to go down as a staff and encourage her and go out for lunch afterwards. But that's not what she prayed. I can't believe God changed my plans, but he did. Why? He was answering her prayer. And everything, God worked it out that the people were away. That was arranged for weeks ago. I couldn't come. That was an insult. We went to lunch the week earlier. He just kept messing with everything until her prayer was specifically answered in detail. Are you tracking with me here? Does God hear your prayers? In details. He hears your prayers. And so you, as a child of God, need to be expecting the provision of God. He watches over you. He sees you. He sees the struggle. Does it look impossible? Well, of course it does. Otherwise, you wouldn't need God. He specializes in the impossible for you, his child. As you go forward in life, as you make room for God in your life, you need to see your life as a series of divine appointments where God has put someone in your path. And then you need to recognize it and operate on it and respond to it. And then thirdly, when you make room for God, you need to expect God to work. He's way ahead of you. If you saw the problem, finally, he's been there a year or so. Honestly, you guys know, in your life and in my life, some of the details that God worked out in my life, provision was being worked out a year or two in advance. So that when I finally got to the problem, God's saying, I thought it'd take you forever to get here. He'd been working on it, and the answer was there. That's how God looks after you, his child. We're ending this series, Making Room for God. And this is, make room for God to live out his mission in your life. And this is what happens. Would you stand with me?